We're still in verses 30 and 31. In fact, all the rest of the sermons come out of verse 31. It's just packed with some things going on here. Last week in verse 30, we read the people were making a covenant with God. They were renewing their covenant with God, and they were making certain commitments as priorities of how they were going to relate to the Lord. And in verse 30, we saw that they said they weren't going to give their daughters to the peoples of the land. When we come to verse 31, it says this: "And if the peoples of the land bring in goods or any grain on the Sabbath day to sell, we will not buy them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we will forego the crops." And we'll look at that next week. So they're making a commitment here about renewing their practices on the Sabbath day, which they had ignored for so many years, and now they are renewing that commitment. When I was growing up and having to, Frank, I just say it this way, Sundays were boring for me because God was boring for me. But I had to go to church. I went to a Catholic school and attendance was taken. That was my motivation for going, because if I didn't go on Sunday, I'd hear about it on Monday. The nuns would make it a point. So I had to go, but it was still boring. And so I thought, well, if I have to go, I should at least do something when I get there. So I joined the altar boy group. And I wanted something to do. At least that wasn't boring. I had no idea what I was saying. You know, that was a long time ago when you had the Latin, right? So that was my experience on Sunday. And when I got to college, I no longer went to church, but our friends would sit around like all college students do, and you start talking about big ideas and why we're here and the origins of the universe and everything else. Isn't that a nice picture? That's a better one. We all agreed, one thing we all agreed on when it came to religious things was that Sunday was boring, and it was really boring because the blue laws said certain stores couldn't be open. The only thing that seemed to ever be open were theaters. So I got a job as a manager working at a theater. I had something to do. But what was odd about our conversations was that there was one young woman in our cohort of students who was Jewish, and she would attend synagogue every Saturday with her parents. Even she agreed Sundays were boring, and she blamed us Gentiles for it. When we go to church, over all the years that we've gone, a thought always seems to pop in my head. Even walking over here on a Sunday morning, it's the honest thing. It's like, I wonder what goes on in other people's minds as they see me or us going to church. What are they thinking? I'm not asking the question because I said, I hope they see how righteous I am. Hardly. But I'm wondering, if just imagine a person standing at their, kitchen window or out looking out the front, they got their coffee cup in their hand and wearing their slippers and they're looking out. What are those Christians? What are they on about? Where are they going? What are they doing? What do they do when they get there? It's a mystery to a lot of them. Now, I wonder, what might you say to someone if they were there and could ask you that question? I was really surprised by a recent church survey about what non-Christians think about Christians. Now, about 5% of those people who were surveyed would say all the very typical things. They were rather antagonistic, hypocritical, judgmental, intolerant. Okay, yeah, we got that. But the other 95% depart from that 5% to some degree. In fact, what really surprised me is that of that 95%, very many of those people would genuinely like to know other Christians. Now, we may not think that's true, but this is what they're saying on this survey, which was done within this year. And so, why would they want to know other Christians? Well, here's some of the reasons they would like to know you. Because they think you know about parenting, and they don't know as much as you. Because you have a Bible that instructs you, and they know that, and they figure you should probably know about what's in that Bible. And in fact, they want to know what's in the Bible. And so they would like it for someone to help them understand it. Does this sound familiar? Just think Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. He's reading it. He's not getting it. God sends Philip and says, are you getting it? And the man says, I don't get it. And so Philip helps him. And that's what people really want to know. They want to know what's in there. Now, they may have all their ideas about, this got changed and that got changed and that got left out. That doesn't matter. They want to know what Christians know about the Bible. And what's really interesting is that they still want to know this, even though many of them have had negative experiences with churches in the past. I mean, they want to know things like if I were to go with you, how should I dress? Can I go in my flip-flops? Would that be okay? If they want to know, well, what are the sermons like? Are they long and boring? And you can tell them, oh, absolutely not. Just tell them, And if there's a dud, you say, well, there's a dud. They want to know, what do you sing about? And if I come and I don't know the songs, is that going to be weird? These are simple questions. These are questions every single person in this room could answer. But the one thing they want us to know is that when relating to them, they want us to be real. They don't want us to promote some kind of problem-free lifestyle, because they know better. And so should we. So imagine the question of that person standing in the window looking out, and you go into church, driving down your street. I mean, it's an empty street. There's hardly any traffic on the roads on Sunday morning, blue laws or not. And they're wondering, what would you tell them? What would you tell them is your purpose for going to church on Sunday morning? And I hope the answer isn't because I grew up this way. Let's see if we can find some other good reasons. Well, we can from this verse. Nehemiah chapter 10 is one of those never again chapters. Never again are these people going to fall into the failure to observe the Sabbath day. And this is rooted, of course, in Exodus 20 and the Ten Commandments. It says this. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall work and do all your work. Notice it says, do all your work in 6 days. How many of you have work left over? Yeah, I know, I get it. Well, this is what God says. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. I have to admit, I was working on my sermon this morning, even a few minutes ago. You, or your son, or your daughter, or your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that's the person that might come with you sometime. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. So this is one of the commands that they have failed to observe. In fact, it's interesting that in this whole list of priorities, this is the only command that they are mentioning here. But they're on the other side of the exile now, and they want to make a fresh start with God. And they know the Sabbath is a really important part of this agreement, this covenant agreement they have with God. And it's a part of who they are as a people. It's a part of who they are as a community. And so they're making a personal commitment to the lordship of God in this. Now, this is the point of this whole little mini-series here, and that is prioritizing the Christ's lordship in our life. And the topic that I've chosen for today is called church life, and I realize that's a huge subject. There's a lot of things to church life, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that we do. So to narrow it down, I'm going to narrow it down to just what this verse 31 is saying. It's about their activities on this thing called the Sabbath day in the Old Testament. So we're going to focus our attention in the same way on just corporate worship. The one thing that we know is part of loving God, our corporate worship. You know what's an interesting thing, a curiosity? Of all of the commandments, only one of them didn't make the crossover from the Old to the New Testament in any sort of command form. And that is this one, the fourth commandment. You won't find the fourth commandment referenced either directly or alluded to in the New Testament. All of the other ones are there. They're all moral issues. that are found in the New Testament. Also, you won't find any explanation for its absence. It'd be nice if, like, Matthew said, well, here's the reason why we're not talking about it. You know, in Matthew 29 or something. But he doesn't do that. Another curiosity about the fourth commandment is that it's not on the last day of the week anymore. I mean, maybe it is for some, but almost immediately the church began to focus on the first day of the week. Now, why would they do that? Well, our job this morning, or my job, will be to unpack why this happened. Why do we go to church? Just remember, if you were asked by someone why you go, what would you say? I hope to be able to give you a whole bunch of good reasons as we unpack this issue, the Sabbath, and its transition over to the Lord's Day. So I'll put it this way. Gathering together for corporate worship goes beyond obedience, obligation, or keeping family members happy. It is a proclamation of Christ as the greatest treasure of our heart. Our trust is not in our work, not in the money we earn from our work, or in our hobbies. We are saying, by going to corporate worship, that we belong to Christ, the resurrected Lord, the Creator of all, the one who redeemed us and rescued us from our slavery to sin, and the only place where souls find rest. So the way that we're going to get to that conclusion is by taking a journey through the New Testament, through the Old Testament into the New, and find out how the idea of Sabbath progressed and how it changed. First of all, we have to take a look at creation. And here's the creation story. Did the sun just come out? Or did lights go on? Or, huh? Okay, I just saw all this light happen. Thought maybe I was in heaven or going there. Okay, in creation, Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. This is what we read. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all of the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day. It's the last day from all of his work that he had done. And so God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, because on it God rested. This is the reason why he blessed it and called it holy, because he rested. He rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So God rested on the last day, the seventh day. He blessed it. He said it's a unique day. That's what he means, but it says holy here. And here's the reason. The whole reason for this stopping of his work is because he was done. It wasn't because he ran out of strength. He didn't need a nap on Sunday afternoon. I had a professor who used to say, I said, what are you doing on Sunday afternoons? He said, I'm going home and taking a nap for the glory of God. God does not have to do that. He didn't deplete 1 ounce of his strength. He was doing something else. He was instructing Adam and Eve about how they were to live their weekly life. So while you work in 6 days, rest on the seventh. So he's modeling for them the rhythm of life, the rhythm of work and worship in the daily, monthly way that we live. And he's just showing them, this is how you do it. I'm going to show you how to do it. And I want you to notice here specifically, there is no command. There's no commandment given. All that we see and read is merely a description of what God did. We don't even see the name Sabbath. God just simply came to the end of his work and he rested as a way to instruct us to do the same. Now, when we get to the wilderness, we get to training. God is starting to train his people to obey them. And in Exodus 16, we see the Sabbath become a formal command. This is what it says. This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest. The holy Sabbath, that's the first time the word Sabbath is used, to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, even if it's water, I guess. And all that is left over, lay aside to be kept until morning. So they laid it aside until the morning as Moses commanded them, and it didn't stink. And it's talking about the manna here. Remember, God had commanded them every day, go out, grab your manna, it's going to last 24 hours, that's it. However, when we come to the last day of the week and you're going to rest, the day before, you go out and you gather enough manna for 2 days, and I'll make sure it doesn't stink up the house. You'll be able to eat it. And so that's what Moses is saying to them here. Moses said, eat it today, for tomorrow is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you'll go and gather it, but on the seventh, which is the Sabbath, there will be none. And guess what they did? Some of them went out in the field looking for the manna, and it wasn't there. And this really irritated Moses. And here's what he said to them. Go back to your tents. It was sort of the wilderness version of a timeout. So, the instruction was simple. And why? Simply to obey. And what other reason could there be, really, than God is training his people to obey his commands. And here's a very simple one. Go out, collect enough manna for 2 days. I will preserve it for 48 hours. Come Sunday morning, the first day of the week, you're back to your routine. You only get manna that will only last for 24 hours, and it's done. So he is training them. But here's the point. This is the first mention of the Sabbath command, and it's around gathering manna. Well, then we come to the Mosaic Law, that is the Ten Commandments. And we already read that verse about keeping the Sabbath. But there's a couple of other scriptures we need to go to, because now the Sabbath takes on the force of a Mosaic law. Exodus 31:13. God speaks to Moses and gives him the reason for this covenant, for this command. It's a covenant sign. God says to Moses, the sign that you are my people and I am your God is that you keep the Sabbath. So everyone can see that you belong to me, I belong to you, I am in your midst, and I have made you different than all the nations around you. So there's these two reasons why this Sabbath is now a law. First, to show everybody, I'm your God, and you're my people. And second, to make a difference between you and everybody else in the world, all the other nations. So now the Sabbath command has the force of law. Now, there is a footnote to this that I want to mention that is in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Those are the chapters where God is in that tussle with Pharaoh. You know, Pharaoh's going to lose. But 3 times, it's interesting, 3 times God says to Pharaoh, I want you to let my people go so they can come and worship me. Now the problem with that for Pharaoh is that these are slaves. How many days do you think slaves get off in their slavery? None. Slaves don't get a day off. And God is saying to Pharaoh, these are no longer your slaves. They're my people. I want them to have time off to come and worship me. Now this is going to figure prominently, I believe, in the New Testament. When we get there, I'll show you how. When we get to the prophets, especially the prophet Isaiah, 2 chapters, 56 and 58, and now you're beginning to see God reveal the spirit behind the Sabbath commands. What is it that God is really after? Is he after external observation of the Sabbath? Well, in the Old Testament, yes, but he's after more than that. God has always been after more than that. He's after the heart. And here's what you see in Isaiah 56. The spirit of the Sabbath is revealed to be the treasuring and the guarding of justice in the community. And that righteous conduct would govern everything the people do. And the promise to the people as they observe the inner spiritual workings of this fourth commandment is that God would give them an everlasting name as his children. They would always be his children. And he would always be their father. And he would fill everything they do with joy and delight in God. That's the spirit behind it. That's what God is really after, the heart. And in Isaiah 58, we see what God expects of them. And he says it plainly through Isaiah the prophet to the people. He says, this is what I expect of people when they come and worship me on that Sabbath day. Take delight in me, their God. Delight. You know, I looked up that word. It's an interesting word. It's not used very often. Delight in the Lord. Basically, what it means is to taste a sweet, dainty morsel that you just love every time you get it. It's exquisite in its flavors, and you enjoy them, and they become something of a delight to you. A couple of weeks ago, Rita and I went to Newburyport, and we went to this restaurant by the harbor. Mike's Harborside Restaurant, if you ever get to go there. And on the menu, they had bay scallops. It's been years since I've had bay scallops, and I love them. And I love them to a point because they're really expensive. And Anita said, "Oh, go ahead." I said, "Yeah." I got every reason to do it. I love them. I delight in these. I delight in them. And I got them, and they were better than I thought. I love every morsel. I bit it. I enjoyed it. She says, "You like it?" I can't even talk. It's so good. I'm excited. It's been years. Do you get that way with God on Sunday morning? Yeah, see, that's what God is after. That's what He wants from us. That's the spirit behind the Sabbath, to take delight in God, as you would in some dainty, sweet cake, dessert thing that, is so rare on your menus that whenever you have it, you just love it, and you don't want too much. You want a lot. But the diet thing, there's no two with God. This is what God is after. So how does He get us there? He gets us there through Jesus. And we come to the New Testament, we come to Christ. And two important texts, Matthew 12 and John 5. In Matthew 12, we see the story of Jesus walking through the fields with His disciples, and they're picking the grain off of the stalks and they're eating them. This is the Sabbath day. So according to the legalistic Pharisees, they were working. And what's interesting about their challenge of Jesus is He does not actually say to them, "You're right," but He seems to indicate, yeah, they're law-breaking. But then He points out a greater, bigger principle and issue. And He says, I guess you've never read the story about David. And David was running away from Saul. And his armies were weary and tired and hungry. They had no food. And they went into the temple and they ate the bread of the temple. Only priests are supposed to eat that. And then David did it. And God didn't say anything. God didn't do anything. He was all for it. I guess you've never read that scripture, Pharisees. And I'll tell you what. Here's the issue. I will have mercy over sacrifice. And then, to stir the pot of the Pharisees, Jesus heals a man on the Sabbath. And then He turns to them and He says the most mind-blowing thing you could say to a Pharisee. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I am the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying to them, I am the Lord. Since I made the Sabbath, I'll tell you how you should use it. And this is the way. Blew their minds. But Jesus was emphasizing the spirit of that Sabbath, which is to express the rule and authority of Christ, not Moses. It's a time for showing mercy and for doing good, even putting in sweat and effort to pull somebody out of a ditch if necessary. The second one, I think, is an amazing text for what it says and what it implies. Here's where the shift takes place. Jesus, again, is criticized for doing something on the Sabbath, and He says, my Father is working until now. Now remember, Remember what we read in Genesis? On the seventh day he rested. So was he still resting? And Jesus says, no, he's not resting. He's working. He's working from then until now. And he started working the very next day, day 8. Why? Because Adam and Eve had fallen. And God got up to go to work on redemption, not on creation. And he started to lay the groundwork and the foundation for the coming of the Son of Man, who would go to the cross and through his death and resurrection create a new community, a new humanity, and a new creation. And Jesus is basically saying to them, you have not read the scriptures carefully enough, because I am the one who is about to inaugurate the end of the ages that will usher in my Father's plan. When we're finished, we are going to celebrate the ultimate Sabbath rest forever. And that rest was secured at the cross and affirmed at the resurrection with power. And the early church knew this. The early church got the significance of the resurrection on the first day of the week. It was the first day of the week. Sabbath was over. It was Sunday. It was the first day of the week. That was the day that Jesus came to be with his disciples. His presence was there. And they got this new rhythm in the life of the church and in the life of the Christian almost immediately. This new rhythm of work and worship now was the first day. And the first day became a celebration of the new thing that Jesus had brought with his resurrection. So a shift has gone away from the old creation to proclaim a new creation in Christ, his victory over sin and death. A new day of creation, a new humanity, and a new community. And here is the point. For us, on this side of the resurrection now, we celebrate the permanent rest for souls, for our souls, that have been wearied by our captivity to sin. When we stop trying to please God by our works, and we trust in the work of Christ, the finished work of Christ, we taste the exquisite taste of freedom and newness because of the resurrection.